Hi, Sandy Hearn here. This is my glue book I just finished. I call it my Holly Hobbie glue book, and I had a lot of fun making it. I've got Holly Hobbie on every page. I had a lot of calendars with Holly Hobbie on it. They're really old calendars, and had a lot of old Victorian decorating magazines. So I've used photos of rooms, magazine pages of rooms, and mixed them in with Holly Hobbie, and I hope you like my book. So here's Holly Hobbie in a sunflower garden. I had a calendar full of Holly Hobbie rainbows. Holly Hobbie in a rocking chair. I added a bird there. So, Victorian clothes. Here's Holly Hobbie, like walking through a meadow by a Victorian house. Here's Holly Hobbie. I love Victorian houses. And here's a Victorian room. There's Holly Hobbie. Here's an ad selling Victorian woodwork. This is one of my favorites. There's a Victorian house with Holly Hobbie pulling a wagon. I added some roses here in the corner. And I love these old kitchens and these old stoves. There's an old kitchen with Holly Hobbie and her grandmother making cookies, and there's a cat. Added an ad for an old stove. Here's a room. There's Holly Hobbie sitting in a chair with a girl. They're sleeping. There's an old house and Holly Hobbie walking by with a hoop. There's a cottage. Holly Hobbie and a boy flying a kite. I added a bench and a flower. There's Holly Hobbie sitting on a stone wall. And I added some scenery of a lagoon or whatever it is. Here's a pretty room. I love these teacups here. There's Holly Hobbie having tea. I had an old fan I put on there. My cat's trying to get in the video. Go away! So here's an old house and the kids playing in the tree and the ad. And I added that little picture. There's Holly Hobbie playing a piano. This was one of my first pages, and I tried to really mix it up a lot. I added a lot of things. This was another one of my first pages. I added some paint on the edge for fun. So here's a pretty canopy bed, and Holly Hobbie making a quilt, and there's some china in a cabinet. There's another pretty bedroom, a teddy bear on the bed. Holly Hobbie sitting on a bench holding her doll. There's Holly Hobbie feeding a cat outside. I added a bird house, and more bird houses, and a bird. There's Holly Hobbie with a clock, beautiful Victorian staircase, and a pretty Victorian room. There's Holly Hobbie in a boat. I added a bench behind it, like on the shore. And I had Victorian wearing her winter coat. Here's an ad for antique stoves. And then there's a Victorian house with snow on it, and just a little Victorian addition there. And here's a Holly Hobbie watering her plants, and I added a wicker chair and a room with a bird cage in it, and a flower and a little stamp thing. There's Holly Hobbie sitting in a chair, checking on somebody sleeping. I added this Victorian lady. There's a pretty room with a fireplace. Holly Hobbie riding a bicycle. The ad for Porch Works. There's an old house and flowers. There's Holly Hobbie with a lamb and a boy, 2 lambs and a boy. I added some newsprint and some outdoor scene, an outdoor scene and some Victorian ladies. There's a Victorian lady. There's Holly Hobbie under an arch, and I added a closet with some old clothes and a Victorian room with a pretty staircase. There's Holly Hobbie with a goose and a pitcher and a outdoor scene of a flower garden and a wicker ad and an old building and a bird. There's Holly Hobbie with a cat on a bench in the rain. There's a hat box, an old postcard, Victorian houses in a row, and a Victorian girl. Here's Holly Hobbie standing on a fence with her little picnic there. I added some flowers and wicker chair and an ornament and a tea set. There's Holly Hobbie at the beach. I added all these little black and white scraps. And here's a scene of a stream and a bird bath. There's Holly Hobbie holding an umbrella. And I put her in a room. And there's a Victorian house there. Here's Holly Hobbie and a boy picking out candy from candy jars, and I added this chair with the teddy bear and the flowers, and I happen to have a nice scene with a cash register in it, so it looks like they're at the candy store. And then here's Holly Hobbie like vending vegetables with I found this old chair with looks like branches, and I put some outdoor scenery behind her. There's a cottage over there and a bird bath and a big bird. I did these on the 4th of July. I had her with the spinning wheel. I added this, and the background I had this picture with the like christening dress, and there's a flag in the background. And then I did this one too on the 4th of July. They're like having a 4th of July parade, and I added the trellis next to it, and behind it is this house with the flag, and I added the bird houses and the eagle. And here's Holly Hobbie making a birthday cake. I love these old stoves. I added the stove and in a Victorian kitchen. Here's Holly Hobbie like a family reading a book. I added some Victorian ladies and a grandfather clock. And here's the bedroom, and there's a bookshelf in there, so it ties in well with the book. And here's Holly Hobbie mixing something up, and I got a little kitchen here with the old stove that I love. And here's an old kitchen. Here's Holly Hobbie playing like peekaboo in a Victorian room. And I added a basket. Oh, the surprise is a kitten. That's what it is. It's a surprise, a basket of kittens. Here's Holly Hobbie with a bunch of potted plants with a friend. And I added this in the background, like outdoors. And then here's a really pretty room. I love all the pink in there, and there's dolls, and it's so pretty. Here's Holly Hobbie on a May Day pole. I added some flowers and a Victorian house behind it. And this is like a tree here, yeah. And then I added that. Oh, and I had these Boyd's Bears. I love Boyd's Bears. They're kind of Victorian style. And here's a Holly Hobbie holding some bunnies. And I added this with the bench. And I added these birds. They were all on the just like this on a magazine page, and I cut out the three of them together. And I got a outdoor background there. And this is a Thanksgiving dinner. And I added the room with the grandfather clock and this beautiful china. And this is a doll. Here's Holly Hobbie and a friend watering the plants outside a window. And I added like a sunroom with wicker furniture and every time I make a video I forget words. A sundial. Yeah, and there's this little outdoor statue. And here's Holly Hobbie and a friend making valentines in their pretty living room. Here's Holly Hobbie picking something from a tree. Oh, there's a bird nest in the tree. And I added this chair, and this was like an ad, and this is your window of opportunity. So that's fine. I left that on there. And here's a fancy garden there. Here's Holly Hobbie with a basket of apples, and I added the arbor here. Yeah, I guess it's an arbor. And there's a porch there. And the last page, there's Holly Hobbie with a plate of cookies. I had another stove, and it's in like a kitchen there. And that's my book, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please click like if you did, so my video gets some likes. Thanks, bye.